Now imagine the morning of your wedding. The room around you is full of the particular electricity of a day that only happens once. The smell of someone's hairspray, the sound of heels on a tile floor, the low hum of voices managing details. The light is coming through a window the way light comes through windows on mornings you have waited your whole life for. Now imagine the sound of a zipper being forced. The specific, resistant sound of a zipper being pulled over fabric it was not meant to close around. And then laughter. High-pitched, bright, completely unbothered laughter, coming from your mother. Now, open your eyes. I was standing in my slip in the bridal suite on the morning of my wedding. The garment bag that had held my custom gown, the one I had spent 4 months choosing, the one I had paid for myself, the one I had tried on 3 times just to feel the specific weight of it on my shoulders, was on the floor. Empty. My cousin Daria was wearing it. And my mother was behind her, laughing, smoothing the lace at the hip with both hands, the way you touch something you have just claimed. Some people don't want to see you happy. They want to see you small. And they will use your most sacred day to prove they still hold the scissors to your joy. My mother made her choice that morning in the bridal suite. She chose a spotlight. She chose a cousin. She chose a laugh at my expense on the day I was supposed to be the one who mattered most. What she did not choose, what she did not see coming, standing there with her hands on someone else's dress, was what I would become in the 6 years that followed. And what I would be holding when she finally needed me. This is that story. And if you have ever had someone use your most important moment to remind you of your place, this is yours too. Stay with me. Every part of this matters. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. If you have ever survived the person who is supposed to be cheering for you, hit that like button. And subscribe because we're just getting started. Let me show you where I am today. Then I will take you back to where it started. I am walking through the doors of a litigation firm. The doors are heavy, the kind of heavy that is deliberate, architectural, designed to communicate that what happens beyond them is serious. The floors inside are polished stone. The air smells like expensive paper and climate control and the faint, particular scent of ink from a printer that never stops running. I am wearing a suit. Charcoal gray, tailored, the kind of garment that was made for this building. It costs more than the wedding dress my mother gave away. I am the lead partner on a fraud case that has been running for 8 months. The case involves a financial scandal, a family estate, mismanaged funds, documentation that was altered, a paper trail that someone tried very hard to make disappear and did not succeed because paper trails, in my experience, are more durable than the people who create them. At the center of the scandal is my cousin Daria. And connected to Daria, inextricably by her own choices and her own long history of looking the other way when looking the other way was convenient, is my mother. She called the firm 3 weeks ago. She did not know it was my firm. She asked for legal professional courtesy, in a voice that still carried the particular tone of a woman who has never fully understood that courtesy is earned, not owed. She has an appointment this morning. She is coming to ask the plain girl for help. She does not know yet that the plain girl is the only person in this building with the power to determine what happens next. But before I tell you what happened in that conference room, I need to take you back. To a bridal suite that smelled like hairspray and betrayal. To an empty garment bag on the floor. To the morning my mother showed me, clearly and completely, exactly who she was. The dress had taken 4 months to find. I want to tell you that plainly because I think the time matters. 4 months of appointments and samples and decisions about lace weight and neckline and what the light does to different shades of white when you are standing in a room full of people who love you. 4 months of a process that is, at its core, the process of deciding how you want to arrive at the most significant moment of your life so far. I had found it at a small bridal boutique that a colleague had recommended. It was not the most expensive dress in the shop. It was the right dress, which is a different thing entirely. Simple lines. Good lace. The kind of gown that does not compete with the person wearing it but instead works with them, quietly, so that what you see when you look at the bride is the bride. I had paid for it myself. I had budgeted for it carefully. I had picked it up 2 weeks before the wedding, brought it home in the garment bag, and hung it on the back of my closet door where I could see it every morning when I woke up. The morning of the wedding, it was gone. The garment bag was still there, hanging exactly where I had left it. But when I unzipped it in the bridal suite, with my bridesmaids around me, with the photographer's assistant hovering near the door. It was empty. Not missing. Empty. The bag was there. The dress was not. I stood very still for a moment. The room continued around me. Someone's music playing from a phone speaker, the sound of heels, someone asking where the bouquets were. The room kept going. And I stood in the middle of it, holding an empty garment bag, doing the specific arithmetic of a person who already knows the answer and is simply confirming it. I knew where the dress was. I had known the moment I saw the bag was empty. Not because I had proof yet, because I knew my mother. I found them in the smaller suite down the corridor. My mother, my cousin Daria, and my dress. Daria was wearing it. The zipper was straining slightly at the back. She and I were not the same size, which my mother had apparently considered a solvable problem rather than a reason to stop. My mother was behind her, hands at the lace, making the small adjustments of a woman who is pleased with herself. Daria caught my eye in the mirror. Something moved across her face, not quite guilt, not quite apology. The expression of someone who knew this was wrong and had decided that someone else's wrongness was sufficient cover for their own. My mother turned. Her expression did not change. That was the thing that I remember most clearly. Her expression did not change. She was not caught. She was not embarrassed. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has arrived slightly early to a thing you were not quite finished with. "Oh, don't be dramatic, honey," she said. "It was an honest mistake. I thought the bag was Daria's. Besides." And here she lowered her voice, as if the lowering of it made what came next less audible, less permanent, less of a thing that would stay in my memory for 6 years. "This lace was made for a star. And you've always been well. The background. You're too plain for this much attention anyway." She said it lightly, casually. The way you say something you have thought many times and finally found an occasion to say out loud. And then she turned back to Daria and continued adjusting the lace. I stood in the doorway of that suite for what felt like a very long time. Long enough to hear, beneath the sound of my mother's satisfaction, a different sound from the corridor behind me. I turned. My fiancé Daniel was standing at the end of the hallway. He had come to check on the delay. He had heard enough. The expression on his face was the most important thing I saw that morning. Not rage at me. Not pity for me. Not the complicated, retreating expression of a man who is reassessing the family he is marrying into. It was fury on my behalf. The specific, clean, protective fury of someone who has just watched the person they love be diminished and refuses to accept the diminishment as normal. He looked at me. He said one thing. "Tell me what you want to do." That sentence, 4 words, no conditions, no agenda, was the moment I understood exactly what I was gaining that day, even as I stood there watching what I had lost. I did not scream. I did not cancel the wedding. I did not give my mother the scene she had, perhaps, been hoping would center her in the story of my day. I smoothed the front of my slip. I looked at Daniel, and I said, "I'm getting married. I just need a dress." One of my bridesmaids, my oldest friend, Clara, had driven separately that morning. In the back of her car, as it happened, was a white sundress she had packed as a backup outfit change for the reception. It was simple. Cotton, not silk. Short, not floor-length. The kind of dress you buy at the end of a summer sale because it is beautiful in an uncomplicated way and does not cost very much and requires nothing of you except that you wear it. I wore it to my wedding. I want to describe that ceremony to you because I think it is important that you understand what plain actually looks like when it is surrounded by the right things. The flowers were wild flowers that the venue had arranged informally, not the sculpted arrangements in the original plan, but armfuls of color placed in mason jars and old bottles along the aisle. The light was late morning light, the honest kind, falling through the windows the way it falls when no one has filtered or directed it. Daniel was at the end of the aisle. He had loosened his tie slightly, his one concession to the changed morning, a small signal that said, "None of the original arrangements matter. Only this one does." When I walked in, he looked at me the way I had been afraid no one would ever look at me. Not at the dress. At me. The ceremony was 23 minutes long. We had written our own vows, which I was grateful for now in a way I had not anticipated, because everything we said to each other that morning was true in a way that had nothing to do with lace or silk or the correct amount of attention. My mother was not there. She and Daria had not come. I did not know this until after the ceremony, and when someone told me, I felt the specific, complicated mixture of relief and grief that comes with a loss you already knew was happening but had not yet fully processed. I danced at my reception in the white sundress. The flowers smelled like a field, not a florist. The dinner was good. The speeches were honest. Clara cried twice. Daniel held my hand all evening with the grip of someone who understood that the morning had been difficult and who wanted his hands to communicate what the day had not left room for words to say. It was not the wedding I had planned. It was, in almost every way that actually mattered, the wedding I needed. And I arrived at the morning after it knowing two things I had not known the morning before: exactly who my mother was and exactly who I had married. Both of those pieces of knowledge turned out to be essential. I had studied law before the wedding. I was 2 years into my practice afterward. I want to be honest with you about what those years looked like, because I think there is a version of this kind of story that skips the middle, that goes from the wound directly to the triumph, as if the space between them is just a montage of becoming, a blur of late nights and dramatic breakthroughs. The space between them is not a blur. It is years. Specific, particular, unglamorous years. It smells like the inside of a law library at 11 o'clock at night. It smells like the coffee that Daniel left on my desk without saying anything because he knew I would forget to make it. It smells like the cheap takeout boxes we ate over case files when the billing hours were long and the case was difficult and there was no good time to stop. It looks like losing a case and sitting in your car afterward for 20 minutes before you go home because you need to process the loss in a space where no one can see you do it. It looks like winning a case and going home and telling Daniel and then doing the same thing the next morning, because winning one case does not mean you stop having to prepare for the next one. It looks like slow, compounding work, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind that only becomes visible from a distance. My mother and I had no contact after the wedding. This was not a dramatic declaration. There was no final argument, no written statement of estrangement. She did not call. I did not call. The silence between us was simply the honest condition of a relationship that had been surviving on pretense for years and had finally run out of it. I heard things occasionally, the way you hear things about people who are still adjacent to your life even when they are no longer in it. My aunt, my father's sister, a woman I trusted, kept me loosely informed without being asked to. Daria had worn the dress to a charity gala 3 months after the wedding. I heard this and felt something I will describe as the universe quietly noting the information for later. Daria had also, in the years following, become increasingly involved in the management of the family estate, my grandmother's estate, technically, which had been held in a trust that my mother administered and which Daria had, according to a gradually expanding set of rumors, been helping to manage in ways that were not quite visible and not quite legal. The rumors became facts. The facts became documents. The documents became a case. And the case, by the particular, unhurried logic of how the universe sometimes distributes its irony, landed on the desk of the litigation firm where I had just been named lead partner. I have thought about whether I should have recused myself. I have thought about it carefully and honestly, the way lawyers are trained to think about things. The answer I arrived at is that my professional obligation was to the law, and the law does not adjust itself based on the personal history of the attorney. My job was to follow the evidence wherever it led, and to do it without prejudice. That is what I did. And the evidence led, as evidence has a way of doing, exactly where it was always going to lead. My assistant came to the door of my office on a Tuesday afternoon and told me that a woman had called asking to speak with a senior attorney about a fraud matter with family involvement. She had not given a last name. She had given a first name. My mother's first name. I sat with that for a moment. Then I told my assistant to schedule the consultation and to assign it to my calendar personally. My assistant, who has worked with me for 3 years and has learned to read my expressions with some accuracy, looked at me for a moment longer than necessary before she wrote it down. She did not ask questions. That is one of the many reasons I value her. I want to tell you what I felt during the 3 weeks between that phone call and the appointment, because I think honesty about the emotional complexity of this kind of moment is more useful than a clean, confident narrative. I felt many things. Some of them were simple. The satisfaction of a closing circle, the specific, quiet satisfaction of knowing that the scales of justice, slow as they are, had been moving all along. Some of them were not simple at all. I felt grief. The same delayed, unfinished grief I had been carrying since a Sunday morning 6 years ago when I stood in a slip in a bridal suite and understood that the mother I had needed was not the mother I had. Grief does not resolve itself because the person who caused it ends up in a difficult situation. It simply continues, alongside everything else, patient and persistent. I felt the professional clarity that comes from years of training, the ability to separate what I felt from what I was required to do. Not suppress the feeling. Separate it. Put it in the correct category. Proceed. And I felt, underneath everything, something I am going to be honest about. I felt curious. About who she was now. About whether the 6 years had changed anything in her. About whether she was coming with a shred of the recognition that had been missing on the morning of my wedding. She was not. But I did not know that yet. The conference room is on the 4th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a long table, the smell of good leather, and expensive ink. It is a room designed to make people understand that what happens in it is serious. I was already at the table when she came in. My assistant showed her through the door and then closed it behind her, and for a moment my mother stood at the far end of the room, her hand still on the back of the chair nearest the door, looking at me the way people look when the ground is shifted under them, so quickly they are not certain yet which direction they fell. I did not stand up. I had my reading glasses on. The file was open on the table in front of me. I was, in every visible way, exactly what the room required, a lead partner reviewing a case in her own conference room. She recovered quickly. I will give her that. My mother has always been good at recovering quickly. It is one of the skills you develop when you spend your life managing appearances. She came to the table. She actually moved toward me as if she was going to embrace me. The arms beginning to open, the expression rearranging itself into something warm and nostalgic, as if 6 years of silence was simply a long gap between lunches that we were both, now, ready to close.
"Darling," she said.
"Look at you. Look at this office. You've done so well." I looked at her over the top of my glasses. "Sit down, please," I said. "We have a lot of ground to cover." She sat. We went through the preliminary review. I asked the questions a lead partner asks. She answered carefully, with the practiced care of a woman who has had 3 weeks to think about what she was going to say in this room. She talked about Daria's case. She talked about the estate. She used the word misunderstanding 4 times, which is 4 more times than the evidence supported. And then, when we had exhausted the professional framing, she leaned forward slightly. And she said, "I know there's history between us, sweetheart. But we're family. And family takes care of each other. Surely you can use your position here to help navigate this in a way that keeps everyone protected." She said, "We're family," in the same voice she had used 6 years ago when she said, "You're too plain for this much attention." The same voice, the same register, the same assumption that the word family was a card she could play and I would fold. She had not updated her information. I took off my reading glasses. I set them on the file. I looked at her directly. "I'd love to help you navigate this, Mom," I said. "But this case requires a star witness. Someone with flair. Someone the room pays attention to naturally." I let that word land. "And since you've always said I'm too plain for the spotlight, I've decided to stay in the background and let the law take its course." She stared at me. I watched her understand. Not just the sentence. All of it. The 6 years. The conference room. The file on the table. The reading glasses. The tailored suit that cost more than the dress she gave away. I watched her understand that the background had been building something she never thought to look for. Then I did something she did not expect. I pushed a second file across the table toward her. "This is a referral," I said, "to a colleague of mine who handles cases of this complexity and who has no personal history with any of the parties involved. She is an excellent attorney. She will represent you honestly and well." I folded my hands on the table. I am recusing myself from this case because our personal history creates a conflict of interest that the law requires me to disclose. I am not doing this to help you. I am doing it because it is what the law requires, and I do not bend the law for anyone, including myself. What I chose was not revenge, and it was not forgiveness. It was something cleaner and more durable than either. It was integrity. The law was the law regardless of who was sitting across the table from me. And the woman who had told me I was too plain for the spotlight was going to find out that the background had been doing the quiet, careful work of building something unimpeachable. She picked up the referral file. She did not say thank you. She stood up. At the door, she stopped. She said, quietly, with something underneath it that was not quite an apology, but was the closest she had come to one, "You look very well, Elaine." I put my reading glasses back on. "I know," I said. She left. The case concluded 4 months later. Daria's attorneys, not the referral I had given my mother, but Daria's own separate representation, negotiated a settlement that involved financial restitution and a formal audit of the estate. The details are a matter of record. My mother was not charged, but her association with the management of the estate was reviewed and her role as a trustee was formally ended. The dress, by the way, was never returned. I had not expected it to be. A thing given away with that much intention is not the kind of thing that comes back. I was outside the courthouse on the day the settlement was announced, not as a party to the case, but because my colleague who had taken the referral had asked me to be available in case there were any consultations needed. There were not, but I was there. The day was clear. The kind of autumn day that has more light in it than warmth, everything very sharp, very distinct, the edges of things more visible than usual. I was walking toward the parking structure when I passed the glass front of the courthouse building, and I caught my own reflection. It lasted only a moment. The kind of moment you have when you are moving somewhere and something stops you, not an obstacle, just a recognition. I looked at the woman in the glass. She was wearing the charcoal suit. Her hair was back. She was carrying a briefcase and a phone and a coffee cup and the general architecture of a person who has somewhere to be and the means to get there. She did not look plain. She did not look like a background. She looked like someone who had been told, once, that she was not enough for the light, and had spent 6 years becoming someone the light found anyway. You cannot dim a person completely.
You can take the dress. You can take the spotlight.
You can take the morning they had planned and the version of the day they had imagined. But the person inside all of that, the person that the dress was always incidental to, that person remains. And she builds, quietly, precisely in the background, where no one is watching. I looked at myself in the glass for a moment longer. Then I walked to my car. Daniel was picking me up for dinner. We had a reservation at a place we both liked, the kind of place where the food is good and the lighting is honest, and you do not have to perform anything for anyone. I was looking forward to it very much. I want to talk to you about the word plain. Not because it hurt me, although it did, in the specific way that words hurt most when they come from a person whose role in your life was to tell you the opposite, but because I think it is worth examining carefully what that word is actually doing when someone uses it to diminish you. Plain is not a description. It is a ranking. It is someone deciding that you do not register on the scale of things worth noticing, and saying so in a way designed to make you agree. It is about their scale, not yours. My mother valued visibility, shimmer, the kind of beauty that announces itself from across a room and requires a reaction. She had built her entire aesthetic, and in many ways, her entire sense of her children's worth, around the question of who would be looked at. She was not looking for daughters. She was looking for reflections, things that caught the light in ways she could take credit for. I did not catch the light the way she wanted. I never had. And so she had decided, sometime long before the morning of my wedding, that I was not worth the full investment of her attention. What she did not understand, what people who value shimmer often do not understand, is that the background is where everything is actually built. The foundations of buildings are underground. The roots of trees are invisible. The infrastructure of everything that stands is the part you never see. Plain is not absence of worth. It is often the presence of a kind of substance that does not advertise itself. I built a career on the ability to read a room without being the center of it, to listen more than I spoke, to find the detail that everyone else had walked past, to do the work that the case required rather than the work that would make me look impressive. Every one of those skills was sharpened by a childhood spent in the background of a mother who preferred her other daughter's shimmer. She thought she was sidelining me. She was training me. She handed me a skill set she could not have understood she was giving because she was too busy looking at the sequins to notice what was growing in the corner of the room she had assigned me to. I am not grateful for what she did. I want to say that clearly. I am not going to reframe the harm as a gift, because the harm was real and it should not have happened. What I am is honest about the fact that I survived it and built from the survival and arrived somewhere that is entirely mine. You can do both of those things. Acknowledge the damage and refuse to let it be the final word. If someone in your life is telling you right now that you are too plain, too quiet, too much background, and not enough shine, I want you to hear something. They are describing their own scale, not yours. Build anyway, quietly, in the background, with the patience of someone who knows that the scales of justice are slow and precise, and eventually they balance. They always balance. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Would you have defended her? Knowing what she did on the morning of your wedding, knowing the 6 years of silence that followed, the way she walked into your firm without an apology, without even the acknowledgement that something had happened, would you have helped her? I want to be honest with you about why I made the choice I made, because I think it matters. I did not recuse myself to protect her. I recused myself to protect the law. And to protect myself, the professional self that I had built with specificity and care, from being compromised by a personal history that had no business in a courtroom. The referral I gave her was not generosity. It was professionalism. It was the thing that the version of me she never believed in would do, because that version of me had been trained by years of working in the background to do the right thing, even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching. My mother has not called since the consultation. The case concluded. The estate was sorted. Whatever she is doing now, she is doing without my involvement. Daria, I heard, moved away. The dress, the original one, the custom one, the one with the good lace, I have no idea what became of it. I stopped needing to know a long time ago. Daniel and I had dinner that evening. The restaurant was warm and the lighting was honest, and at some point during the meal he reached across the table and held my hand and did not say anything because he did not need to, because he has always understood that the thing I needed most was not words but the presence of someone who is simply, steadily, entirely on my side. That is the marriage we have built. In 6 years of the quiet, unglamorous, profoundly meaningful work of two people choosing each other every day without ceremony. A dress can be taken. A morning can be ruined. A word can land in a place it was designed to wound. But none of those things are the final word on who you are. The final word is written by the life you build in the aftermath. And the life I built, in the background, without an audience, without the silk that was made for a star, is entirely, completely, and precisely mine. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done. Tell me if you have been called plain or background or not enough. Tell me where you are watching from and what you are building in the silence. I read every one. If you are currently being told you are not enough for your own dreams, subscribe. Share this. Because the person saying it is usually just afraid of how bright you'll shine when they are no longer in the way.
Get out of the way.
And then shine.
I'm Elaine.
I am the lead partner. I wore a white sundress to my wedding. It was enough.